All right. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's event. I am Sarah Holian, the Curator and Director of Interpretation at the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. And tonight we are delighted to share this special volunteer and members event with you. Kathryn Smith, author and historic preservation consultant, is joining us to talk about the Robie House. Kathryn was a scholar in residence at the Robie House in 2003 and co-hosted a webinar on the Robie House sponsored by the U.S. International Council on Monuments in October 2020. She has prepared the Historian's Report for planning studies for Holly House, Barnsdale Park, Florida Southern College, and Darwin D. Martin's Graycliff. She has also been an advisor at Taliesin and Taliesin West. Kathryn has authored numerous books, including Frank Lloyd Wright, Hollyhock House and Olive Hill, and Wright on Exhibit, Frank Lloyd Wright's Architectural Exhibitions. She was awarded a Wright Spirit Award from the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. And she's joining us today in the first of two lectures in the series to celebrate her newest publication, Frank Lloyd Wright's Robie House, published by the Organic Architecture and Design Archives. Tonight, Kathryn will be discussing Robie House, one of 8 Wright buildings listed as World Heritage Sites. She will focus on the 2-year period of design and construction using construction photos taken by the contractor, Harrison Barnard. These photos reveal the extent of the steel framework to explain the daring roof cantilevers and the wide span of interior rooms at Robie House. Also of significance is the spatial revolution that Wright built into the Robie House when he controlled and manipulated how people move through the space. Just as a few side notes before Kathryn begins, Connor will be monitoring the Q&A during the talk, and we'll have time at the end to answer questions for Ms. Smith. So Kathryn, again, welcome. Thank you for joining us today from Los Angeles, and we are looking forward to hearing your talk.
Hello, Chicago and environs. Way out there on the East Coast, and I hope Japan. I would like to thank the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust for sponsoring the lecture and the Organic Architecture and Design Archives at the Chicago Center, Eric O'Malley and Bill Scott, especially as the publisher of this new publication on the Robie House, which you see here. Here we see the Robie House. It's located in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago. The Frederick C. Robie House is at the corner of 58th Street and Woodlawn Avenue. A museum quality restoration by the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust has returned the building outside and inside to the original condition at the completion of construction 1910. Frank Lloyd Wright had made his reputation creating a new residential type, the Prairie House. Names that are familiar are the Willets, the Hertley, and Coonley residences. He also completed 2 monumental structures, the Larkin Building in Buffalo, New York, and Unity Temple in Oak Park. The Robie House was one of the last buildings that Wright designed in his Oak Park studio. This was a period of great personal turbulence for Wright, and I will speak of that in the minutes ahead. The client, Frederick C. Robie, seen here in his 1902 portrait, was a Chicago entrepreneur who employed industrial technology, materials, and methods to invent new transportation machines, such as motorcycles and automobiles, to improve daily life. His wife, Laura Hieronymus, was a college graduate She graduated from the University of Chicago. And after being married for 6 years, the Robies began to have a family as their son Frederick Jr. was born in February 1907. The Robies evidently began to think of a family home to raise their children. Their daughter Lorraine was born in December of 1909. The fourth most important person in the design and construction of the Robie House was Harrison B. Barnard, a college graduate. He also graduated from the University of Chicago. He joined his father's construction company, and I must point out that his intelligence, his technical knowledge, and his attention to detail certainly contributed to the success of realizing Wright's plans and specifications. Now, the Robie House foundation plan, which you see here on the screen, is one sheet. This is sheet number 1 of 10, prepared in the Oak Park studio. It was revised in March 23rd, 1909. Robie purchased the vacant lot May 19th, 1908, and probably hired Wright some months later. On March 23rd, 1909, Robie and Barnard met with Wright to review the final plans. And here at the bottom, you see the typical legend that Frank Lloyd Wright used during the Oak Park studio years. It says Mr. F.C. Robie, dwelling, Chicago, Illinois, then gives the address. Frank Lloyd Wright, architect, Oak Park, Illinois. Beneath that tiny letters, it says revised, March 23rd, 1909. And here you see above that is the signature of Frederick Robie. This is what we call contract drawings. This is when the contractor and the client enter into a contract to build the building. It was 1909. Now, on this sheet, you see the number 6, as you see over there. Let me get this going for you. See, oh, well, okay. Number 6. This is sheet number 6. These are the elevations of the south side, as you can see. And this was sheet number 6. And on this particular sheet, you can see Frederick Robie's signature and also H.B. Barnard. This is a wonderful piece of memorabilia. H.B. Barnard and his descendants, his son and his grandchildren, contributed Barnard's records to the University of Chicago. And this is the specification folder. These are very rare. We rarely see these. It says, as you see, Mr. F.C. Robie, Chicago, Illinois, specifications, excavation, masonry, sheet metal, carpentry. And this was a specially designed sheet by Frank Lloyd Wright, as you see down here, from Frank Lloyd Wright, Forest and Chicago Avenues, Oak Park, Illinois. And I'll point out to you, do you see all these wrinkles? This is probably because Mr. Barnard carried this around rolled up in the pocket of his jacket as he went from the job from day to day. Now, here's a digression away from the story directly of the design and construction of the Robie House. This overlaps the entire period, 1908, 1910. On the screen, you see Mamah Borthwick Cheney, who many of you are probably very aware of. Cheney and Wright fell in love, and by summer 1908, both wanted a divorce from their spouse. Kathryn Wright proposed that she wanted Wright and Mamah to promise to have no contact for 1 year, which apparently covered September 1908 to September 1909. In the meantime, Wright and Mamah made their own plans to spend time together in Hyde Park. Now, we know this because of the new book, which has been published by her distant relative, Mark Borthwick. In chapter 14, he published the details of his research. Mema enrolled at the University of Chicago, and Wright rented rooms at the Chicago Beach Hotel at 51st Street in Hyde Park. Arthur, the author, Borthwick, does not know how much time the couple spent at the hotel, as they made plans for 1909. During this period, Wright received a letter from Berlin. So as you can see from what I've just explained to you, Frank Lloyd Wright and Mema, who promised to spend a year apart in Chicago, did not keep their promise. Now, here in front of you is a portrait of Ernst Vossmuth. We've heard a lot about him over the years because of the publication Vossmuth's Portfolio. He founded a book publishing company under his own name in 1872 in Berlin, Germany. When he died in 1897, his sister-in-law, a widow, became the owner of the publishing company and hired Otto Dorn as manager. The company hired editors and began to publish small special picture books on individual architects for their periodical 20th Century Architecture. Now you see, since Ernst Vossmuth died in 1897, not be possible for him to write a letter to Frank Lloyd Wright in 1908, as has been published several times. This is the series. It's called, as you see here on the screen, this is number 4. This is all in German because it's a German publication. This language says special issue of the architecture of the 20th century. This was a publication that the firm brought out as a special, this was a periodical with subscribers, and subscribers got the special edition along with their publication. Now, what you see here down at the bottom is this, all in German, published by Ernst Vossmuth AG, which is German for what we call in the United States Inc. In other words, this is a legal designation. This is the firm, 1910. Now, this is number 8. You see the same description here. This is Frank Lloyd Wright. And you see this here as the same. This is language that Wright put in the contract, that this could only be sold in Europe. This was the ostensible reason why Wright decided to go to Europe. And I put all these details in the book I published in 2017 called Wright on Exhibit. I have a whole section on what actually was the story behind the Vossmuth portfolio, which you see here, and the smaller picture books. Wright implied that this was the publication that the Vossmuth firm engaged him in 1908 by sending him a letter. Actually implies it was Vossmuth himself, but actually this is something that Wright took up when he got to Germany after seeing this. This is a portfolio of the work of the Austrian architect Joseph Albrecht. It's called The Architecture of Albrecht. Came out in 3 parts, and it was a large portfolio of loose plates that Wright was certainly shown in October of 1910 when he walked in the doors of the Vossmuth firm. This is a plate from the Albrecht portfolio, and it's kind of interesting to note that Albrecht's portfolio is 19 inches by 12 3/4. Frank Lloyd Wright's portfolio is much larger. It's 25 inches by 16. And it's certainly Wright came to the conclusion that having a portfolio like this was his main priority as he wrote Charles Ashby in 1910 from Europe. The Vossmuth firm was interested in the built buildings to throw photographs, Wright was interested in what he called the architect's ideal, which was through perspectives that were drawn in Europe by himself and his son. Oops, sorry. Yeah. These were all being worked out in 1908 and 1909 when Frank Lloyd Wright and Mae McChaney were spending time off and on here at the Chicago Hotel, at Beach Hotel, Hyde Park Boulevard and Lake Shore. And this is when Lake Michigan came right up to the edge of this building. The shoreline has been changed in Chicago over the years, filled in. It's no longer the same. The building's been destroyed. But here you see that the Robie House Commission developed while Wright and Nema were spending time here off and on, while they planned to leave Chicago for a 1-year period on their own. While the Robie working drawings were underway, Wright began to prioritize the Robie House as a commission. He planned to complete to the client's satisfaction and to be faithful to his design, even if it required a plan, and he had a plan in mind. He came to a 2-part plan: finish the building as a superstructure while he was still in Chicago as part 1. Turn over the interior as to finishes and furnishings to his trusted collaborator, George Mann Niedecken of Milwaukee, as part 2. Basically, a 1-year plan starting in April of 1909 to April of 1910. And again, we have our gratitude to Harrison B. Barnard. He was the contractor, and this man was of exceptional intelligence and insight, because what we have is 30 photographs that he took of the construction of the Robie House. This is number 1. He created a photo album where he pasted in each photograph, and every single one of Barnard's photographs is reproduced in the publication that I've just completed and is on sale now. This is number 1. This is the vacant lot of the Robie House in the spring of 1909. Barnard also left an entire collection of documents, which include a ledger of the payments out to all the workers and subcontractors. So we know on a week-by-week basis, a month-by-month basis, the exact progression of the construction of the Robie House, which Barnard must have felt was one of the most unusual and innovative houses he'd ever seen in his lifetime. This is probably about late April of 1909, and we see here the beginning of the construction in the foundation area, the stone being laid, and here is Frank Lloyd supervising the construction. He has to communicate to the workmen the standards for which he has designed the building, and then he corrects mistakes and he approves everything that is correct to the plans and drawings. This is possibly the same day, and you see that the walls are rising. Here's a test area of brick, so that Wright's very specific way of laying brick is carried out to his understanding and his supervision. Now we're moving along, and a few months later, we see probably by May or June, this is the ground floor. 58th Street is in this direction. And what you see is the brick walls beginning to be constructed. They're rising, and the brick piers along here. A couple of mistakes in here, which are going to be corrected. But what I want to call your attention to is the steel. These photographs are such a revelation when we see the actual steel in the building going up. So for so many decades, we've never known how the Robie House has achieved these very dramatic statements in terms of construction and architecture. Here we again, now we're about probably June of 1909. We can see some of this because of the leaf on the trees, the vegetation around, and we're still on the ground floor. Here's the steel. I know you're interested in this. This is Mr. Robie, Mrs. Robie, and their young child, Fred Jr. But I also want to emphasize this steel that we see here. This is a component part of how and why the Robie House is on the World Heritage Site. Now, we are all grateful to the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust because through their thorough and museum quality restoration, they uncovered the original steel framework. And this is a drawing made by the trust. There are 3 of them like this: the ground floor, the main floor, and the 3rd floor and section, which is all reproduced in the publication that I've completed with the courtesy of the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. It's allowed us to replicate them. And this is the main floor. Many of you have probably been there. The living room, the dining room, and here's this very extraordinary balcony out off the living room. So this is made possible by the steel framework, and you can see by looking at the plan that this is a series of glass doors, glass windows, again, glass windows. So you see, this indicates that all of this area mainly is glass. For 1908, 1909, this is extraordinary. Going back to Barnard's construction photographs, now we see maybe this is August. Again, I call your attention to the leaves on the trees. We also have the ledger of payments out to the subcontractors. Here we have the ground floor. This is the living room balcony, the living room itself, and on the 3rd floor was devoted to the family bedrooms. We also can note the cantilever of the roof, which extends 8 feet 6 inches from the wall of the building. It's extraordinary. And I have to tell you, I do not know who this man is. Certainly it's not Wright. I'm not even sure that it's Fred Robie. I actually don't know. But it's interesting how the balcony hovers over his head. And for those of you who know structure, you will realize that a brick parapet and a stone lintel could not support this. This is defying reason. And this is part of the drama of the Robie House, but now we know how it came to be. The fall. Here you see that the trees have lofted leaves. So now we're probably in September. Frank Lloyd Wright and Mama had made their arrangements to leave Chicago in September. There's documentation that Frank Lloyd Wright ended his business affairs on September the 22nd. And Mark Borthwick has found evidence that Mama and Frank Lloyd Wright left Chicago on September the 29th. So on September 29th, when he left the city before going to Europe, the Robie House was basically at this point of construction. And what happened now is that the work moved indoors, partly because of the weather. This is ideal, but also because of the timing with Wright's move to Europe. The work was now taken over by George Van Niedecken, who had collaborated with Frank Lloyd Wright for many years. And there's also documentation in Niedeken's archive that Frank Lloyd Wright and Niedeken had met 3, 4, maybe as many as 5 times in September to go over details of the finishes and the furnishings in the Robie House for the Robie family. So he is turning the work over to somebody he trusted. Now I'm going to shift my discussion to explain to you what I call Wright's revolutionary idea of architectural space. And on the screen, what you see is the Villa La Rotonda in Italy by Palladio. And this is a monument of the Italian Renaissance, dating to about 500 years ago, when there was a new conception of architectural space. Buildings were conceived as ordered and compartmentalized from a fixed point in space. In other words, the human connection with the building was from one point, say here. And from this fixed point, the building revealed itself clearly. We have the line of symmetry down the center of the building. The entrance is clearly marked. And you can see it's straight ahead. The explanation and understanding of the interior is clear from this point in space. The viewer knew exactly where he or she was by the order that was made by the architect designer. The space was absolute. But what does Palladio have to do with you? Well, this was the sense of space for 500 years, up through the beginning of the 20th century. In fact, up until Wright began experimenting with it in around the 1900s. Here we see an American colonial house. And again, if you stand here, the entire building reveals itself to you. There's a line of symmetry, runs down right down the center of the building. This side mirrors that side mirrors this side. The entrance is clearly marked. By standing here, all is revealed. The architectural space is clearly ordered. Now we move to the Robie House, where this all begins to change very dramatically. And on the screen here, I'm showing you 2 of Wright's drawings. The one here and here. This is the lower floor, and this is the upper floor. In other words, this is the ground floor, and this is the main floor. That's what appears on the construction drawings. So, again, standing here, this would be the main facade. This is 58th Street right here. This is the cross street, Woodlawn Avenue. So if we stand here and we look in that direction, there's no immediate way of entering the building. You have no idea how to get in there. And so right now, I'm going to ask you to do something. If it's possible for you to not think like a modern person, you have lived your whole life in the modern era. But I want to take you back to 1910. If we can enter the Robie House as if you've never been in a modern building before, then I want to see if you can put yourself imaginatively back to that position. I think it's going to be really hard, but we're going to try. Here we are in front of the Robie House on the street. I don't need to belabor this point, but it's very clear there's no front door. So the next thing that happens is the viewer, let's say this is a visitor to Mr. and Mrs. Robie in 1910, has to begin looking for the front door. This is what we call a path of discovery. We finally come around here to Woodlawn Avenue. And we look down the walkway. And we're wondering, the view from the sidewalk, the front door is not visible. The 1910 person is standing there thinking, what do I do next? Architectural space is now relative. Light and shadow have a role. There is concealment. You walk forward to discover. Now we're closer. You as a visitor, you are in movement and you are moving forward. Light, as you can see, across the face of the building is critical, and also shadows. The darkness of the front door is part of the drama of a visitor's personal experience of the space. Also scale. The scale is shrinking. You notice that? The entrance appears hidden. This is Wright's revolutionary idea, how space has become relative. No other architect before 1920, I argue, would or could do this. We reach the entry and we enter inside. The space opens up and widens. This is both exhilarating and mysterious. People are drawn to light, and that is the same here. Now we look towards the light, and the light is visible straight ahead. It's coming from above. Sunbeams shine down through a pierced wooden grill. It is impossible to see what is above. The brick and plaster walls do not reveal. See, plaster wall, brick wall, plaster. The grill itself is a barrier, but the space is relative to twists and turns that lead you forward. The architectural space is very dynamic, unlike the static space of the Renaissance ideal. Now we move up the stairway, and the confinement of the stairway changes and opens up in every direction. But yet Wright has controlled what you see. There are solid walls, as you see here, and there are pierced grills, as you see here. You can see through, but still it's not open. Another open grill. There's grills and pierced screens on either side. This step is very relative. You can look in either direction. You can look left or you can look right, even behind you. The architectural space is being revealed, but in sequence. The screens confine your physical movement. Your curiosity is what is propelling you forward. Now we're at the top of the staircase, and it's possible to look around even more. There's grill work, but we see some light coming. We turn and we see through this hallway a most unusual situation. It's mysterious, but at the same time dynamic. It's a diagonal view. Diagonal. A partial revealing. The most astonishing way to lead the visitor to the most important space in the house. No one, absolutely no one in 1908 is as good at this manipulation of interior space as Wright. The visitor is drawn to the light. And once you move forward on the diagonal, it is clear that you have arrived at the destination as light floods from three sides, standing on the line of symmetry of the main floor. See here? The line of symmetry. The room opens up with what is almost for 1910 walls of glass. This is daring, but not possible without steel. But most visitors would not realize that. But the discovery is not over because the visitor is prone to turn around. And this is what the visitor sees when the visitor moves 180 degrees on the line of symmetry. And what you have is both a revelation and a mystery. Because as you stand here and you look forward, what you see is the income seating on one side, facing this line of French glass doors that continues on beyond. And then even more dramatic is the fact that the fireplace is pierced. Most people in 1910 would find this very unusual. And you can see that the banding on the ceiling in the living room continues beyond. We don't know beyond. So it's quite mysterious. But again, light draws you. And we notice that there's a passageway here that allows us to move beyond this. So there's a mystery and then there's a revelation. The dining room is the culmination of the public spaces revealed for the Robie family and for friends. The building and the furnishings are seamless, as Wright had prioritized Robie in his schedule for 1909, 1910. Now, at that time, Wright did not pre-plan to present Robie to the world in the German publications. But as Niedecken was giving the final touches, Wright was submitting his drawings and photos to the Vossner publishers in Berlin. The result was an influence on European architects, especially in the 1920s. There is a direct link between the Robie House and the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe and Lloyd Wright. And I'm going to point that out to you because I'm sure right now you're saying, I don't get it. Okay, here we go. Here's the Barcelona Pavilion, which was designed by Mies van der Rohe and Lloyd Wright in 1929, demolished in 1930, and reconstructed in 1986. The materials are steel, 3 kinds of glass, you see that here, and 3 kinds of stone. And we'll look at that a little more closely. Mies said that the Europeans were 20 years behind Wright. He was correct. Mies had learned the lessons of Wright's Robie House. He studied the various components in the German publications, which came out in 1910 and 1911, and analyzed each part, the roof, the walls, the new architectural space. Then Mies synthesized through the aesthetic of geometric abstraction. This was the European contribution. I want to clarify that what I'm talking about is Wright's idea of architectural space, not the literal architectural language of the Robie House. His roof, his walls, his stained glass doors and windows, obviously they're not here. What we have is Wright's space, which was revolutionary in 1910 and taken much farther in the 20th century with geometric abstraction. He conceived of the walls, Mies, as planes. Here we have a horizontal plane. This is the horizontal plane here, and vertical planes. This is a glass wall, stone. This is geometric abstraction. He conceived of the roof and the walls as planes, horizontal and vertical. And the roof cantilevers, you see here, cantilevers out, as did the Robie House because of steel. But again, this is not a literal interpretation of the Robie House as formal elements. This is Mee's drawing of the plan of the Barcelona Pavilion, and I want to just explain that to you. What we have here is the structure and a ornamental pool, a bench against a wall, and this is an additional building for services, a small building off to the side. These small little crosses are the structure. And this, for me, was really the main point. He wanted to show that by 1929, with industrial materials, steel, the steel could support an entire structure on these thin points. And here we have the planes. These are vertical planes in space. They actually become partitions. And this dotted line that you see here is the outline of the roof. In this section, there is an ornamental pool as well. In the Barcelona Pavilion, because of the nature of the composition and the nature of it was a World's Fair exposition. It wasn't a gallery for paintings. There was no really exit or entrance. People, in terms of architectural space, could enter at this point, or some came down and entered at this point. But you see that the main point here, emphasis is that, again, architectural space is relative. It is dependent on the movement. Mies used Wright's apparatus of concealment and revelation, but the visitor was free to move at will through the space of the Barcelona Pavilion. And this is a photograph taken by Uzi Toivonen. He's my photographer in Helsinki, Finland. He took many of the photographs of the Robie House, and this is his photograph of the Barcelona Pavilion. My man in Helsinki. And the focus of the Barcelona Pavilion on the interior is this large onyx gold vein wall. And here you see that this is a partition, so space flows easily around, behind. This is a panel of walls, so you have floor to ceiling, glass. There's transparency inside and outside, and you can move out here and then back and then into this interior space. Mies had really taken Frank Lloyd Wright's discovery one step further. And what he had conceived was now what is modern space. Frank Lloyd Wright's idea of architectural space was modern. It is what he meant when he said, the Robie House was the cornerstone of modern architecture. Everything that I have just said can only be understood by an in-person, three-dimensional visit to the Robie House. So luckily, the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust is there to welcome you. And I suggest, with a beautiful summer ahead of you, please visit soon. Thank you.
Kathryn, thank you for a wonderful talk. I really love the chronology that you created almost month by month about how Robie House was built and the importance of the use of steel in its construction and how it allowed Wright to really create this idea of architectural space and how you tied that, of course, to the much longer genealogy of 20th century architecture. That was really terrific. And we have quite a few questions already
Yes.
coming in. I don't know. Did you want to read the first one, Connor?
Happily, yes. First question. Has it ever been determined why the dining table is set perpendicular to the main line of the house in Robie House?
Well, no, I've never actually heard that specific question expressed, but my opinion would be because if you look at the space of the dining room, that gives it a much more generous and graceful position in the room.
Right, we have another one. Does the Frank Lloyd Wright archive at the Avery Library contain the Robie House original developmental and construction drawings?
Well, that's an excellent question. That's actually a very excellent question, because one would assume, because of the importance of the Robie House, and actually so much that's been written about it and what went into the World Heritage Site application, that there would be a great deal. But that is wrong. That is actually quite wrong. There's hardly any original material at all in the Avery Library collection. That's actually the Frank Lloyd Wright archives at the Avery Library, Columbia University, New York. And first of all, I want to mention right at the beginning, the original, what we call working drawings or construction drawings, the originals have been lost. They don't exist. They would normally have been black ink on linen, and they don't exist. What we have is blue line, and I think that's primarily, again, because of Harrison Barnard. And these are 10 sheets of copies. And there are actually 26 drawings on the Avery Library posted online. And you know that Wright left in September, and he turned over his work to another Chicago firm called Van Holst. And there are 4 drawings out of the 26 that bear Van Holst's legend. But there are gaps all around. So there are actually no original sketches. There's no developmental drawings. What we have left are the construction drawings and just 2 or 3 other drawings based on mainly the beam lights in the living room. So my theory of this is that when Frank Lloyd Wright left for Europe and the Robie House was under the Van Holst supervision, that the drawings were moved from Oak Park downtown to Van Holst's office. Now, I don't know if they ever got back to Oak Park. It could have been that Van Holst just threw them away. But we have the second thing, which is in 1910, Frank Lloyd Wright began to plant Taliesin in Wisconsin. And in 1911, he moved to Wisconsin. So everything from Oak Park would have moved to Wisconsin. They could have been lost at that point. But no, it's very sketchy what survives. That's a good question.
I'll read the next one.
Okay.
During your research for your book, what surprised you regarding Robie House?
Oh, what surprised me? I guess the biggest thing that surprised me, and this again, I have to congratulate and thank the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust, because when they did their major restoration of the superstructure of the building, it required taking a lot of the walls and the ceilings apart, mainly because there was asbestos material in them. And at that time, they discovered this whole steel framework. And scholars had been debating up to that point, well, maybe there's one steel member here and one steel piece. But that's when we really found out how much steel was in this building. It's almost like it's a steel building, but it's not. It's not a modern steel building. But I think it's true that the Robie House contains more steel than other prairie houses.
Right. And we have another comment/question that came in. And I'll just read it as the author wrote it. Niedecken wasn't actually an architect. He designed much of the furniture in our house. This is the resident from the Edward Irving House in Decatur, Illinois. But Marion Mahoney under von Holst was brought to our house to completion after Wright left in September 1909. Was Niedecken the actual architect of record after Wright left?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, Niedecken, there's a great deal of material on Niedecken and two major books by the scholar Cheryl Robertson. And it's very clearly pointed out that he wasn't an architect. He called himself an interior architect. So as you see what I've explained about the Robie House, we have the whole superstructure of the building. Niedecken was really an interiors person.
Next question. Could you tell us more about your time as the scholar in residence at the Robie House, and what did you enjoy most in that position?
Oh, that's funny. Well, I'll tell you a little personal anecdote about that. Is that I had been visiting the Robie House off and on for several years during the first part of their restoration, which was on the structure before they also moved inside to work on the interior. And the restoration architect at that point was a woman named Karen Sweeney. And she had her offices up here on this part of the building. And I would go up there and it would be busy with Karen with leaves of drawings and people buzzing around. And I would come for 2 hours and then leave. And I thought, this is so great. And one day I was invited to lunch. And the lunch was because they had a preservation intern from the Art Institute who was like in her 20s, and she'd spent the summer there. And they said, we're going to take her out to, I think it's Medici's, isn't that the famous place in Hyde Park? And would you like to come? And I said, oh, yes. So there we were having this lunch. And I thought, why is she allowed to spend the summer there? What about me? Couldn't I spend the summer there? I'd get a lot out of that. So I talked to Karen Sweeney about this and other people at the trust. So it worked out that they said, well, yes, we could work that out with you. So that's how it came about in the summer of 2003. And I also was up there on the 3rd floor because that's where Karen had her office. And the other thing was I was allowed complete open access to all the files. Also, I did research at the University of Chicago, which is not far away. And that's when I found Harrison Barnard's collection, which was like a Pandora's box. I mean, he just opened it up and there was everything in it. Learned so much. We really know so much more. And by the way, here's another anecdote. A couple of days ago, I talked to Harrison Barnard's grandson, James Barnard, and invited him to attend the lecture. So I think he may be out there listening to me. So as I told him the other day, thank you so much for your family for the donation, because we know so much about the Robie House. And your father and your grandfather had a sense of history, and it wasn't lost because of them. So that was a big revelation. But the other thing was I didn't have a goodbye party at the Medici.
No goodbye party. Well, I think we have time for one more question that appears on the chat. And someone asks, the servants' rooms were over the attached garage.
Right.
Was both the attached garage and the location of the servants' quarters unique in 1910?
Yes, well, I don't know, unique would imply, one of a kind, but I believe they were almost unique. Yes, I couldn't say historically accurately whether this was the only one, but certainly because of Robie's profession and technical interest in automobiles, it was a three-car garage. So yes, this would have been probably unique. I would agree. And Sarah, if we're running out of questions, there might be two minutes here. There was something I wanted to add because I didn't explain it during, I had to get to 45 minutes and that was, but if I could add something, you just let me know.
Of course, of course.
Is this a moment?
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left.
Okay, I wanted to tell the audience, how many of you are still there, that during the course of this restoration, this research, I noticed this correspondence between the Robie House and the Barcelona Pavilion. So I started to spend more time looking at the Barcelona Pavilion. During COVID was part of it, and then after COVID. And what I found out was, there's now a foundation in Barcelona dedicated to the Barcelona Pavilion. And they sponsored, I think it's now 3 years ago, a grant for research related to the Barcelona Pavilion. And it was awarded to a woman, I believe I know she's Spanish. I'm not sure if she's specifically from Barcelona, who did research into the details of Mies van der Rohe in 1929 in Barcelona. And she's come up with volumes of evidence, and there's more to it, but I don't have time to explain it, that at that time, Mies van der Rohe was in a partnership with Lily Reich, which is why I just said the Barcelona Pavilion was designed by Mies van der Rohe and Lily Reich. Now, unless all of you already know that, I would think some people were actually shaking when I said that, because this is a new attribution, not just Mies van der Rohe, Mies van der Rohe and Lily Reich. And she has tremendous amount of evidence about this. And I just refer you online because the Fundación Barcelona Pavilion has all of this documented with tremendous evidence. So the attribution of the Barcelona Pavilion is now Mies van der Rohe and Lily Reich. But going one step further, and I don't know how this still stands, but in this research, it's possible that Lily Reich designed the Barcelona chair, not Mies van der Rohe. So all of this is still a very new information. And I constantly look at the Knoll website to see if they've changed that. And still, they are selling it as Barcelona chair by Mies van der Rohe. But they may have to erase that in the future. I think it's an interesting point for people who are watching this program to look into, especially if you're in Chicago, because that's a right place, but that's also Mies' place.
Well, Kathryn, that is a wonderful point to end on. I really appreciate that consideration of how the history we're taught is always evolving and new things are always being uncovered. And I'm really looking forward to your next lecture in October.
Yes, we should tell them about that.
On October 15th, when you'll be talking about Laura Robie specifically and her role at Robie House and some of the new research that you've uncovered about Laura and her lifetime.
Yes, her biography. It's called Out of the Shadows, Laura Hieronymus Robie.
That's right.
We're
That's right.
Do that in October.
That's correct. And so I hope many of you will join us there. Again, a hearty thank you to Kathryn Smith for joining us tonight. And still on the screen is Kathryn's new book, Frank Lloyd Wright's Robie House, again, published the copy came in. I don't think if I hold it up, you can see, but I got my hands on a copy today, published by Organic Architecture and Design Archives. So thank you to you and to Eric O'Malley and everyone else who made this beautiful publication possible.
Thank you to the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.